Welcome to Wolves of the Danube, a gritty Roman military survival story. Written by Brian M. Brumbaugh, narrated by Ned Rattor, an ink and imagination production. Surrounded, abandoned, hunted by winter itself. When a Roman frontier legion is cut off beyond the Danube, survival becomes a question not of tactics, but of will. Led by Centurion Flavius Drusus, a handful of war-hardened survivors must navigate betrayal, starvation, and blood-soaked snow as they attempt the impossible to return home. But some wolves don't go back to the den. Some become the wild. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Frozen March. Winter 173 AD. The Dacian frontier. The snow didn't fall, it crushed. Thick flakes piled high across the ridgeline, weighing down the pines until their limbs broke like bones. The wind howled through the trees, not as song or storm, but as something ancient and cruel. It didn't blow through the Roman column, it moved with it. Centurion Flavius Drusus trudged at the front, face half covered by a frost-crusted scarf, his breath thick as smoke. His armour, once polished and parade-worthy, was now dulled with ice and filth. The red of his cloak had long since faded into a muddy smear beneath layers of wolf pelts and frostbite. Behind him marched what remained of Cohort X of the II Italica, over 600 men sent to pacify a restless stretch of northern Dacia. A minor operation, they'd been told. Quick and clean, just a show of strength. They were 12 days into the wilderness and hadn't seen a Roman fort in 5. The line was silent. No singing, no jests, no profanity, just the low, constant crunch of boots in snow and the occasional grunt of a man falling to his knees from exhaustion or cold. Tribune Lupercus rode near the rear, warm on his horse, wrapped in an imported cloak from Gaul. He hadn't spoken to the rankers in 2 days. He had sent a message to the governor the day before with the last scout to turn back, saying morale was holding and the enemy was scattered. He hadn't seen the dead goat carcasses strung in the trees the morning before. Flavius had. At dusk they made camp in a small glade surrounded by frost-bitten pines. The tents were slow to rise. Some men didn't bother, just fell where they stood, curling into themselves like dying dogs. Flavius checked on the rearguard. 23 men, most too young or too broken. One, a boy named Caius, had frostbite so deep in his fingers the flesh had turned black. "Cut them off, sir?" asked Marcus, Flavius as second in command, kneeling beside the boy. "No," Flavius said. "Wait until morning. Let the cold do most of the work. Brutal, merciful." That night, Flavius stood beside the fire, hands outstretched, listening to the silence of a legion that no longer trusted its leadership or the gods. "You know we're not turning back," Marcus said, voice low. "Of course we're not," Flavius replied. "Lupercus would rather freeze us to the bone than report a retreat. And you?" "I'd rather not die in the snow following a coward." They stood a while longer, saying nothing. A howl cut through the trees, long, low, close. Not one wolf, several. The men looked to the trees. Flavius did not. He stared into the fire, muttering a single word. Ominum, bad omen. Before sleep, Flavius carved a mark into the pine near the edge of camp. Not a Roman standard, not a symbol of Mars or command, just a single line flanked by 2 half-circles. A fang, a warning. It wasn't regulation, but it was honest. The snow would not be their grave, not yet, but the Danube was watching, and the wolves were already circling. Chapter 2. The ambush. The forest narrowed. The trees grew tighter as the Roman column pressed east, their breath coming harder with each step. Visibility shrank to paces. Snow clung to every branch, muffling the sound of metal and boots. Centurion Flavius Drusus didn't like it. Too quiet, no birds, no wolves, no wind, just the unnatural silence of waiting death. He raised a fist, halting the column. Marcus came up beside him, adjusting the worn fur around his neck. "What is it? Smell that?" "Nothing." "Exactly." Flavius unsheathed his gladius with slow precision. He didn't shout. He didn't raise the alarm. He simply turned and whispered one word. "Shields." The men obeyed, quietly. Tension coiled in their limbs like cold iron. Then the trees exploded. The first spear hit a man near the rear. It didn't kill him. It pinned him to a tree. He screamed until the second came. Dacians poured from the pines. Not wild tribesmen, but trained, disciplined, camouflaged in snow-dyed furs and Roman leathers. They wielded curved falxes and looted pila. Their formation was tight, coordinated. They were using Roman tactics. "Form up!" Flavius bellowed, voice cutting through the snow. "Form up! Testudo!" The column was too long, the spacing too wide. They were still forming when the second wave hit. Chaos reigned. Men slipped on ice, impaled through chainmail. Swords clanged off frozen shields. Blood splashed hot on white snow. Tribune Lupercus shouted from atop his horse, trying to flee. A Dacian axe cleaved his horse's leg, sending him crashing into the snow. He screamed, and then vanished beneath blades. Flavius didn't try to save him. He rallied what was left of the vanguard, 30 men, dragging them into a defensive arc near a cluster of boulders. "Hold! We hold here. Let them break against us." A young soldier, Caius, missing 2 fingers from frostbite, threw a pilum with shaking hands. It landed in a tree. A Dacian speared him before he could throw another. Marcus stabbed a raider through the gut, twisted and roared. "They're copying us!" "No," Flavius growled. "They're perfecting us." He cut down a man who wore a Roman cloak. Underneath it, a legionary tattoo. It didn't last long. 400 of the cohort died in less than 30 minutes. The rest, those near Flavius, survived by slaughtering their way out through a break in the ridge. They didn't flee. They escaped. At dusk, Flavius counted the survivors, 47 men. He sat by the fire, blood frozen in his beard. His knuckles cracked when he clenched them. "That wasn't an ambush," Marcus said. "No," Flavius replied. "That was an execution." He reached into his satchel and pulled out a bloodied scroll case taken from a dead Dacian captain. The seal on the scroll? The tribunes. The Foris took 400 lives. But it gave Flavius one truth. They'd been sent to die, and someone in Rome wanted it done clean. Chapter 3. The Forgotten Dead. The survivors didn't speak as they walked. The wind had gone still, but the silence was worse. After the ambush, even the sound of footsteps felt intrusive. The forest pressed close on all sides, and every tree felt like it might whisper something they'd rather not hear. 47 men remained. Only 20 were uninjured. Flavius Drusus led them uphill, favouring his left leg, the bandage beneath his greaves already stiff with frozen blood. Marcus walked behind him, gladius still drawn, more out of reflex than purpose. The trail disappeared by mid-morning, swallowed by snowfall, and then they saw it. A blackened stone arch rose between 2 cliffs, a half-buried entrance flanked by collapsed columns and scorched statues. A pagan shrine, Dacian, ancient, the sort of place Rome ordered razed but rarely remembered to finish. They approached with caution but not reverence. They needed shelter. Inside they found a cave, deep, winding, lined with soot-streaked stone. At its centre was a fire pit long cold, surrounded by the remains of the dead, Roman and Dacian alike, piled, arranged, as if for ritual, or remembrance, or worse, display. Some wore armour, others had been stripped, but all of them had been left here with purpose. "What the hell is this?" whispered Marcus. "History," Flavius muttered. "And warning. They made camp anyway. Better the dead you can see than the wolves you can't." By nightfall, fires burned in the pit again. Men gathered around, eating dried meat, whispering about what they'd seen. One muttered about curses. Another said he saw a man blink, a corpse blink. Flavius ignored it, or tried to. He found a bundle in the far chamber, a satchel made of stitched Dacian fur containing Roman scrolls, half-burned, illegible, except for one phrase, scrawled in Latin, hurried and smeared with blood. "We were betrayed. We stayed too long." The land watches. That night, one of the sentries went missing. They found him in the morning, 30 paces from camp, slumped against the stone wall. His throat had been slit, but no blood in the snow. His fingers were stiff, curled around a broken spear. At his feet, drawn in the dirt, a crude symbol, a wolf's eye, watching. Flavius sat beside the flames, jaw clenched, hands outstretched to the warmth. Marcus sat opposite him, carving a small wolf tooth into a charm. "It wasn't wolves," Marcus said. "No," Flavius agreed. "Then what?" Flavius stared into the fire, voice cold and low. "Guilt, memory, ghosts in the snow. You believe that?" "I believe dead men remember things we want to forget." The forest had spared them once, but the cave? The cave was full of stories Rome refused to write down. Chapter 4, Blood on the Ice. They left the cave at dawn. The fire had burned low. The fear hadn't. 46 men now, and none willing to say the dead sentry's name. Centurion Flavius Drusus led in silence. Marcus followed with flint and pilum, eyes scanning every ridge. Behind them, the wounded limped, bundled in wolf hides stripped from last night's hunt. The Danube had frozen ahead. It was the only crossing. The river stretched like a sheet of glass across the valley, silent and shimmering. Snow barely touched its surface. Trees clustered thick on the far bank, shadows curling in the branches like waiting claws. They tested the ice with spears. It held. 2 men at a time, Flavius said. Spread the weight. Shields up. They began the crossing. They made it halfway when the first arrow struck. A Roman fell, screaming, his blood smearing the ice in long, ragged strokes. Then the second volley came. Dacians burst from the tree line, cloaked in white, invisible until they moved. They weren't raiding, they were herding, funneling the cohort toward the ice, toward open exposure. And then the wolves came, real ones, thin, starving, maddened by winter and blood, driven by the scent, driven by whistles from the trees. They weren't just predators, they were weapons. Marcus raised the signal horn, but never blew. A javelin caught him low in the side, twisting him backward into the ice. He landed hard, crawled, grunted. "Get them across," he roared. "Get them across, or they die here." Flavius grabbed 2 by the collar and shoved them ahead. Another soldier slipped, cracked through the surface, and vanished into black water. It became a sprint. Iron on ice. Shields raised, men screaming, wolves tearing into the stragglers, arrows falling like rain. Only 28 made it across. Flavius dragged Marcus last, blood streaking behind them. He didn't let go of the horn. That night they burned the dead. Not all, just the ones they could find. They stacked limbs, not names. They didn't speak prayers. There was no priest left, just Marcus, bleeding under a furskin, staring at the flames. "I saw one of them," he whispered. "The archers. He had a gladius." "Standard issue? Deserters?" Flavius asked. "Worse? Traitors?" Flavius didn't speak for a long time. He stared into the fire until his face was hollow. Then he said, "They wear our steel because Rome gave it to them. Why? Because we were never meant to come back. They crossed the river. But the real ice, the kind that cracks without warning, was already beneath their feet. And it wore a senator's ring." Chapter 5. The Pact of Ashes. The survivors no longer counted days, only losses. 28 men, no healers, little food, half their steel stained with Roman blood. The forest ahead was thicker now, colder too, but not wild. It was patrolled. They found the first sign on the third day, a Dacian banner, tied upside down, fluttering from a Roman spear. Below it, a pile of ashes and the stripped corpse of a soldier, not theirs. He wore the crest of Legio Thexti Rapax, the dead legion, or so they'd been told. "We're not alone," Marcus whispered, still limping, arm in a sling. "No," Flavius replied, "but they're not Dacians. They made camp in a dry ravine, fires low, guards doubled. At midnight they came, 5 men, silent, stepping from the trees like ghosts in legionary armour, cloaks grey with frost, faces hooded, but the armour, Roman, mismatched, dented, and very much real. "Hold!" Flavius ordered, raising his blade. The tallest of the strangers lifted his hands, slowly, deliberately. "You're not the first to be thrown to die out here," he said in perfect Latin. They called themselves the Ashborn, former legionaries, survivors of the Rapax and others, left behind in previous failed campaigns, written off by Rome, men who had lived by betrayal, fire, and pact. They didn't serve the Senate. They served survival. That night they made a deal. The Ashborn would lead Flavius's cohort to the abandoned fortress of Tapor, a half-ruined Roman outpost deep in enemy territory. In exchange, half the weapons, half the rations, and loyalty until the fortress. "And then," Flavius asked, "then you choose Rome or the wolves?" Some of Flavius's men grumbled. Cassian, a young Optio, called it treason. "We don't bargain with deserters," he spat. "They're not deserters," Marcus said from the shadows. "They're us, 2 weeks from now." Cassian didn't argue after that. At dawn, they gathered around a small fire. Flavius, Marcus, and the Ashborn leader, Aulus Varian, once a primus pilus, each dropped a pinch of ash from the burned Rapax banner into the flames. "We live together," Varian said, "or we die as nothing." "We're already ghosts," Flavius answered. "Let's haunt Rome." The pact was made. The ashes still burned, not in the fire, but in their eyes. The forest didn't just shelter wolves now, it had made new ones. Chapter 6. The Siege of Tapor. Tapor was no fortress. It was a graveyard pretending to be one. The walls still stood, but barely. Moss devoured the western tower. The gate creaked open with the sound of rust giving up. The barracks had collapsed. A tree grew through the old command tent, but it was shelter, and it was defensible. They had made it. "We rebuild the wall," Aulus Varian growled. "We stock the cistern, we trap the woods, and then," asked Cassian, still bitter, "wait to die slower?" "No," Flavius said, "we make them bleed trying." They worked in silence. They didn't speak of the pact. They didn't speak of Rome. Snow was their mortar, wolves their alarm, and hatred their fuel. By the 7th day the outer wall stood again. By the 8th their lookout spotted smoke, signals. By the 9th the horns came. Dacian forces, no longer raiders but a war band, appeared at dawn. Dozens, then hundreds, forming like fog around the fortress. Drums, torches, banners waving with blood-red wolves. "They mean to bury us," Marcus muttered. "Good," Flavius replied. "We're already ghosts." They came in waves. The first, reckless young warriors, testing defences, they fell to boiling oil, hidden pit traps, and salvaged Scorpios from the half-frozen armoury. The second wave brought fire arrows and siege rams crafted from forest trees. By nightfall, 2 breaches smoked, and 4 Romans lay dead. Aulus dragged the bodies to the gate, and left them there. "Let them see," he said. "Even our dead hold the line." On the 3rd night, Cassian was caught fleeing, armour gone, horse stolen, coin pouch heavy. Flavius said nothing. He took the sword from Marcus, walked into the snow, and returned alone. By the 5th day, the Dacians brought forth a Roman, bound, bloodied, still alive. "We found your brother," the war chief shouted from beyond the line. "He says Rome forgot you. We believe him." They threw the body at the gates. It thudded against the timber like a final insult. "Open the gate," Flavius said, "and nail him to it." No one argued. The Dacians did not attack that night. The wolves howled. The firelight burned bright behind the walls of Tapor. The snow glowed red. Inside, 21 Romans sharpened blades. No prayers, no speeches. Just the kind of silence that only comes before a final reckoning. "Tomorrow?" Marcus asked. "Tomorrow," Flavius said, "we stop being forgotten." They had no reinforcements, no supply lines, no hope, just ice in their lungs, blood in their eyes, and a fortress built from the bones of the damned. Chapter 7, the 13th Wolf. The wolves didn't howl that night. They watched. Perched along the frozen ridge lines and shadowed tree lines beyond the ruined walls of Tapor, their eyes gleamed with something more than hunger. They knew, as animals often do. Inside the fortress, the fire had burned low. Snow hissed softly into the embers. Flavius Drusus sat alone, sharpening his blade by the half-light. The others slept, or pretended to. Sleep was dangerous now, because there were 13 of them, but only 12 should have lived. He had counted again and again. The numbers never changed. 28 men had entered the woods, 15 had fallen, at the river, at the ash pact, at the siege line. 1 had fled, then died. That left 12. So why were there 13 boots drying by the wall? Flavius stood and walked to the shadows. Marcus met him halfway, already awake. "You feel it too?" Flavius nodded. "Something's off. He says his name is Rufus. Claims Legio II Augusta. Doesn't wear it like he earned it." Flavius muttered. "Armour's too clean, boots too new, and he sleeps light. Like us. Or like someone watching wolves from the inside." At dawn, they circled him. Rufus stood silent in the centre of the courtyard, arms at his sides, no chains, just silence. The others formed a ring. Flavius, Marcus, Varian, and the rest. No one shouted, no one demanded. They had seen enough of death to know how it announced itself, quietly. "Where'd you serve?" Flavius asked. "Britannia," Rufus replied. "Then the Rhine. Your centurion's name?" "Hadrianus." "Funny," Varian said. "Hadrianus died 2 winters ago, drowned in the Rhine. I was there." A ripple passed through the circle. Rufus didn't blink. Then Flavius stepped forward and drew his gladius. "You get one chance," he said. "Draw or die on your knees." Rufus moved fast, too fast. He snatched up a blade from the ground, spun on his heel, and met Flavius steel to steel. The circle surged backward. It was not a brawl. It was a duel born of training and secrets. Metal hissed, sparks flew. Rufus fought like someone who had been trained in every legion's weakness, not just his own. And then, finally, he stumbled. Flavius didn't hesitate. He slammed his shoulder into the man, knocked him to the snow, and pressed the edge of his blade against his throat. "Name," Flavius demanded. "Caius Calidus," he wheezed. "Spy! Under Praetorian order." Flavius stared at him. "Why?" "To confirm failure," Caius spat. Blood flecked his lips. "To watch, to record, to make sure no one survived long enough to speak." "Rome sent you?" Marcus asked, voice cracking. "Rome buried you before the wolves ever did," Caius said. "You're dead already. The Senate just wanted the bones accounted for." Flavius stood slowly, never taking his eyes off the man. Then he turned his back. Let him bleed. No one questioned the command. No one helped. They left him in the snow. By nightfall, they dragged the corpse outside the gate. No rites, no honour, just a pyre of scavenged timbers and a fire lit without ceremony. The wolves began to howl once more, but this time they sounded less like predators and more like brothers. Chapter 8. The Blood Price. The snows deepened. So did the silence. They burned the traitor's body the night before. Now only 12 men remained inside the ruined Roman fort at Tapor, surrounded by enemies seen and unseen. The wolves kept their distance, but the Dacians did not. At first light, the drums began, a slow, thunderous beat that rolled through the trees like the echo of gods too old to pray to. The sound crawled into bone. "They're building the siege mound," Marcus said, staring through a gap in the barricaded gate. Flavius nodded. "Then we buy time, with blood if we must." The Dacians didn't rush. They were smart, measured. They circled the fortress like butchers, testing each wall for weakness. A dart here, a torch there. At dusk they dragged up a captured Roman, stripped, wounded, still alive, and nailed him to a broken scutum, propping him against the outer gate. He screamed their names, not in pain, in warning. "We're out of oil," Aulus reported. 3 peeler left, no ballista, and we haven't eaten in 2 days. "Then we fight hungry," Flavius said. "And what if they breach the walls?" Flavius glanced at the fire, at the black wolf tooth he'd taken from the spy's corpse. "Then we burn the whole funking fort." That night they held a council, not of strategy, but of memory. Each man spoke a name, a brother, a wife, a son. They carved them into the inner wall with knives, flint, and fingernails. By the time the snow fell again, that wall bore 1,000 years of reasons to die standing. And then came the horn. The Dacians charged at dawn. Not like raiders, but like men with nothing left to lose. They came over the walls in waves, screaming, fire in their fists. The sky was grey with smoke. Flavius fought without thought. His blade moved on memory. Varian set fire to the northern gate before it could be breached. Aulus slit throats until his hands froze shut around the dagger. One by one they fell, but not down. Forward. By dusk the courtyard was slick with blood and snow. The Dacians had pulled back, but they'd taken what they came for. 6 wolves still stood. 12 had become 6. Flavius found the wounded chieftain near the wall, alive, barely. A broken spear had pierced his side. "Go," Flavius whispered in Dacian. Tell your warlord what we paid." The chieftain smiled through bloody teeth. "You're not wolves," he said. "You're ghosts." Flavius didn't answer. He let the man crawl, because some enemies needed to live, to spread the legend. The Dacians had taken 6 lives, but they'd bought nothing. The fort still stood, the wolves still howled, and Rome still hadn't come. Chapter 9. Winter of the Dead. 6 remained, 6 wolves in broken armour, wrapped in scavenged cloaks and soaked in the memory of their brother's blood. They left the fort at dawn, not in retreat, but in silence. No horns, no banners, no gods, only the whisper of snow under tired boots and the crunch of bodies left behind in the courtyard of Tapor. Flavius led them north, not toward Rome had forgotten them, but toward the old trader roads that snaked through the Carpathians. If they could reach the high ridges, they might survive the winter. Might. Their breath froze mid-air. Fingers blackened. Aulus had to cut off his own boot with a heated gladius after his foot turned blue. They burned the last of their rations on the 3rd night. After that, they boiled pine bark and drank snowmelt laced with ashen blood. Still, they marched. On the 6th day, they found a hunter's lodge buried in frost, half collapsed beneath a fallen tree. The roof had holes, the hearth was dead, but it held one miracle: meat. Frozen venison hung from a rafter like a corpse from a tree, rotten in spots, rancid in others. But food. Varian cried when he tasted it. Aulus didn't wait. He ate too fast and vomited into the snow. They laughed. For the first time in weeks they laughed. The cabin saved their bodies, but not their minds. One night, Marcus screamed that he saw wolves standing on 2 legs. Another whispered to ghosts. Flavius stopped dreaming. When he closed his eyes, he only saw names carved in ice, one for each man he left behind. Each face he failed. On the 8th night, Aulus never woke up. They buried him beneath a cairn of frozen stone and silence. The wolves came that night, not to eat, but to watch. Flavius stood by the fire, sword in hand, glaring into the dark. "Come then," he muttered. "Take what's left." But the wolves never moved. They just stared, and then vanished into snow. The last 5 reached the ridge by dusk. Below lay a frozen river, its surface glassy and black beneath the moon. A voice broke the wind. Romans, they spun. Across the ice, 3 Dacian riders waited, spears raised, eyes hollow with hunger. "You don't belong here," one shouted. Flavius stepped forward, sword sheathed. "Neither do the dead," he said, and then he walked onto the ice. It wasn't a charge, it was a death dance, steel on ice, breath like smoke. Blood spilled across frost as men slipped, struck and sank beneath the cracking sheet. One Dacian went down early, his spear lost to the river. Another struck Varian through the thigh, only to be gutted in turn. The 3rd fought Flavius, blade to blade, and when the ice cracked beneath them both, Flavius didn't move. He just grabbed the man and dragged him down into the freezing black. The world went silent. He awoke choking, coughing river water and blood. Varian had dragged him free. The Dacians were dead, but so was Marcus. 4 now, only 4. They built a pyre from driftwood and torched it without ceremony. As the flames rose, the wolves gathered on the opposite bank, watching, always watching. They didn't fear the dark anymore, because they'd become it, and when the river froze again, the wolves marched on. Chapter 10. The Last Howl. The forest no longer whispered, it watched. Branches creaked not from wind but from weight. Snow, yes, and eyes. 4 men trudged through the half-melted slush of what had once been a road. boots worn to leather ribbons, armour more rust than steel. They were not legionaries now. They were revenants. And at their centre walked Flavius Drusus, once a centurion, now something less, and far more. They were heading north, toward a fire that shouldn't exist. It was smoke they followed, drifting in unnatural curls through the forest canopy. Not Dacian, not Roman. Could be a trap. Varian muttered, his voice ragged. Good, Flavius said. Let them try. The fire led them to a hilltop shrine, ruined, ancient, older than Rome, older than Dacia. There, standing in the orange glow, was a man in imperial robes, clean-shaven, dry boots, rings on every finger. A small escort of equestrians lingered behind him, sipping mulled wine like they weren't in the middle of nowhere. Flavius Drusus, the man said, unfurling a scroll. By decree of the Senate and people of Rome, you are to return immediately to the capital. Your survival has created quite a stir. Flavius stared at him for a long, cold moment. And the men I lost, they will be remembered, the official said, as if that settled anything. You will be paraded, praised, retired. The scroll trembled slightly in the official's hand. You'll be rewarded, Centurion. Title, estate, gold. Flavius looked back at his men, at Varian, barely standing, at Hadron, one eye frozen shut, at Lucan, coughing blood into a cloth he didn't show anyone. We didn't survive for a parade, Flavius said. We survived because Rome forgot us, and we remember that— He tossed the scroll into the fire. You can take your decree, he said, and tell the Senate the wolves are not coming home. They let the official live. Let him ride back south, flanked by soldiers who kept their distance from the 4 half-dead ghosts in wolf-tooth cloaks. That was suicide, Lucan said quietly. We could have ended this. No, Flavius said. We just did. Before they left the hill, they buried their dead. All of them. At least the names. They carved everyone they could remember into the old stone altar of the forgotten gods. Varian wept. Hadron sang. Flavius stood silent. Then he lifted a blade and drove it into the earth. His own gladius, chipped and blood-hardened. This is our Rome now. The end? Epilogue. 20 years later, a village boy stumbles through the forest with a wooden sword. He finds the shrine by accident, sees the names carved deep, hears a howl. And when he returns to the village and tells the tale, the elder only nods. The wolves of the Danube, she says. They never came home. Why not? The boy asks. Because they became something Rome couldn't hold. No tomb holds them. No monument bears their likeness. But where the snow falls thick and the firelight cracks, their names are whispered, and the wolves still howl. Author's note: thank you for taking this brutal, frozen march with me. Wolves of the Danube isn't just a war story. It's a story about being forgotten and surviving anyway, about men broken by cold, by betrayal, by the empire that once draped them in crimson, but who chose to stand not for Rome, but for each other. This tale was inspired by real frontier outposts, the hellish winters of Dacia, and the haunting reality that not every legion marched home in triumph. Some simply vanished into legend. If this story moved you, if you felt the frost in your bones or the fire in your chest, please like the video, drop a comment. Subscribe for more Roman epics, political thrillers, and survival stories from history's darkest corners. And remember, not all wolves wear fur, some wear armour. Until next time, Brian M. Brumbaugh.